Hello, welcome to Education for the 21st Century, brought to you by Lehigh University, the Center for the Development of Urban Educational Leaders, C-Dual, and the Educational Leadership Program here at Lehigh University. Today, we want to welcome Dr. Lucretia Brown to our show. Our show explores different kinds of educational issues. It's pretty much topic-based. Today, we have a fabulous topic with regard to urban education, equity issues, and Dr. Brown is certainly a friend of the program and a friend of the show. And I'd also like to introduce at this time Tashina.
Hello, my name is Tashina Kabaz. I'm a graduate student here at Lehigh University, and I would love to introduce Dr. Lucretia Brown to you.
Thank you.
Dr. Brown is the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Accountability in the Allentown School District. Prior to her work in Allentown, she held a similar position as the Director of Equity in the Reading School District and also worked for the MidAtlantic Equity Center. Dr. Brown earned her bachelor's in legal studies from the University of Pittsburgh, master's in urban education, and doctorate in educational leadership from Alvernia University. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent, excellent. Can you share with us sort of your journey to your current position?
Well, I would have to say that it started back in some of those other districts, particularly the Reading School District. In Pennsylvania, historically, equity has always been sort of this mandated strategy or approach based on consent decrees. Mm-hmm. So it started with Pittsburgh out in the west with a consent decree with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and then Reading also began with a consent decree from the Human Relations Commission. That was very comprehensive. Mm-hmm. So it really spoke to the district advancing equal opportunity and access in areas of English language learner programs, special ed, academic achievement when you disaggregate it by the subgroups, encouraging and promoting robust family engagement, and then also this whole idea of equitable representation in facilities. So I would say my journey began with the mandated change, and then culminated, if you will, I won't say this is my peak, but I'm certainly on an upward trajectory, or the work is on an upward trajectory in the Allentown School District in about mid 2012 or so. A consent decree mandated that a district equity coordinator be hired solely with a focus on Title IX compliance. And then that role evolved into what we have here today, a executive level position focused on aligning outcomes with equity and accountability.
Okay, excellent.
And you talked about your interest really stemming from when you were in Reading. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if you could just go a bit more in depth about that, like what really got you interested in the topics of diversity and equity?
Well, my interests go back further than my tenure in Reading. My interest in diversity and equity I would say go all the way back to probably the early 90s, where I was working on my graduate degree, the first one, in urban education. And it was a curriculum-driven program, so it was really focused on teacher education and curriculum and programming. But because I have not taken the traditional route, so I am not a teacher, I had some space and flexibility to do some different sort of research and focus, which drove my advisor crazy because he was like, you should be here getting a teacher cert, and I was like, just kept pushing like no. And that was right around the time when No Child Left Behind was coming out, and in my mind I was like, that just sounds way too restrictive, and I really wanted to focus on teacher attitudes and beliefs in the classroom and how they impacted what a lot of my colleagues were working on. So curriculum implementation, classroom and behavior management, and fortunately I had some faculty that helped me support that. So that's where that work really originated from. Yeah. Yep.
Excellent. Now, how has your role evolved as a result of having different leaders in the district?
That's a really good question because During my first cabinet level equity position, I had probably about 4 different superintendents, because most urban districts, I don't want to generalize, but often find themselves in these situations where leadership is in flux and they're struggling academically, which subsequently means they're struggling with organizational culture and all of those different elements that support teaching and learning. And so all that to say, I came in under a permanent superintendent who had this idea of equity just being driven by that consent decree and just live within those parameters and do what you can. And then another one thought that it should take an HR perspective and focus on workforce diversity and some of those grow your own programs and things of that nature. Then another one that thought it was more rooted in community engagement and work. And none of them were wrong, except I'm at a point now where our superintendent understands that equity isn't a one-off program or an ancillary program. It's a continuum of strategies and programs that advance the organization toward equity. So it's not this silver bullet that we're ever going to find and identify. It's you must know a lot about a lot to do comprehensive equity work. So, yeah.
Good.
So how have the attitudes of leaders influenced diversity and equity conversations in the district?
So I see those things as connected but separate. So with regard to diversity, leaders' attitudes are supportive. So diversity is about representation, making sure that we have representation. We already have uninfluenced representation in our student body because our demographic is very diverse. In the district that I'm in currently, majority Hispanic, Latino, with smaller populations of African American and white students. So when you look at the diversity of our staff, though, it's the polar opposite. And so that's where the conversations get interesting, and you have to find a fine balance between folks who think you want to displace them and devalue them, balance that with this whole idea and notion that we can do better and we do need to grow our own and we do need to strategically and intentionally target certain populations to come in and round out, if you will, or give better representation for certain groups in our administrative staff. So that's the diversity conversation. The equity conversation here in our district, and I would argue in Central PA, is it's developing, it's in its infancy. So and to do so, you have to begin to shift people away from, okay, we have this representation, now let's talk about outcomes. So equity for our district and for my own leadership perspective is really about outcomes and making sure that there is access and opportunity so that we can advance and support those outcomes, similar outcomes for different groups. So when we look at our gifted and talented and advanced placement courses, what does that demographic look like? When we look at our discipline, are we seeing those classic signs of disproportionality with certain subgroups being overrepresented in that population and underrepresented in a gifted and talented or advanced placement? So you have to balance that and really root it in the data and the research, because it's very emotional conversation that you're having, and you have to consider that this is new ground and new territory, and folks come to the table with all types of different experiences. So you want to be able to honor that, but still be able to educate and build capacity as we try to advance the work. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it is. I'm glad you sort of elaborate on the differences between diversity and equity, and that's I think that's so important, because there's a lot of confusion with regard to the two, making the two equivalent, not recognizing that they may be related.
They're cousins.
Yeah, they're cousins, but not quite the same thing.
Right.
So with that, now the original question had to do with a shift in the way people view equity. But I'm going to ask a slightly different question,
Sure,
actually.
sure. Go ahead.
He's going off script already. Don't worry, it's within the conversation.
It's okay.
And this is, well, as you're doing the equity component, how are you dealing with people's entrenched beliefs, attitudes, and perceptions? Because as we do that particular work, a lot of it is introspective, and folks have to deal with some of the things they've been brought up to believe, come to believe,
Right.
and not putting it on the student or community and recognizing, well, it's about my own leadership practice and my own teaching practice.
Right. So that's a great question as well. As I started out in this work early years ago, the recipe, if you will, was to begin just there, starting with attitudes. Even in my master's work, looking at teacher attitudes and beliefs. And I still believe that's valuable work that needs to be done. But as I advanced to cabinet level positions and had strategic placement at the leadership table of the district, I needed to shift that conversation and really emphasize this whole idea of organizational effectiveness and performance-based work, because then you don't have you will get to the point where you need to discuss attitudes and beliefs, but adults like to find their own way, because as well-educated adults, we all think we already know everything. And so the backdoor kind of way that has worked for me better than trying to confront folks' beliefs and worldviews is to begin to look at the data, understand the mission and the vision and the goals, and just work from an organizational development paradigm. And then at some point, those emotionally driven conversations of attitudes and beliefs and how we grow up and our intrinsic biases and things of that nature, they come out. But to confront them head on, I found to be in the initial phase of the work counterproductive. So I like the organizational theory piece of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What do you do to counteract the conflict?
You have the conflict, but I would argue that it's a different type of conflict. It's organic, self-inflicted conflict, if you will. So, especially for those educators that are really conscientious about their work, and they'll come to you and they'll say, I'm doing all of this. I'm setting goals. I'm focusing on this, and my special ed black boys are still failing. So now we can talk because you've called yourself out, and I don't need to call you out. So folks are more apt to engage authentically and organically when they've identified their own shortcomings. So yeah.
That's great. So, what have been your greatest accomplishments in this new position and the previous position?
So I would say that my previous positions were dress rehearsals for being in this district, because there was so much transition and change at the highest leadership level, and mandated change being the worst kind of change that you could sort of implement. It was dress rehearsal. So and having to adapt and reinvent myself every time a new suit came into place. Dress rehearsal. So, but all that led to my current district, and what I have to say is the greatest accomplishment for the work and the district is our equity policy. So in the state of Pennsylvania, we are one of 4 districts that have an equity policy, and ours is housed in our finance section because the title of the policy is equitable resource allocation, and in there are specific critical measurement factors that speak to outcomes. So how well have we resourced our teachers, our students? How well have we monitored and evaluate student representation in advanced courses? Students taking the SAT, students taking those gateway courses, because even before you get to the advanced courses in college placement, how well have we prepared them for grade level reading by grade 3, algebra by grade 8, so that they're set up on this trajectory very early on. And so that is one of the accomplishments that I'm most proud of to have introduced and advanced. in the district. We adopted it last January 17. Yeah. And then I would say second to that would be our strategic framework that we just introduced, which has equity embedded throughout the document in the mission and vision. There's a commitment to equity that is one of the first pages of the document. And then, of course, the metrics, progress indicators, all of that undergirding equity and how we're going to advance the work.
That's fantastic.
Wow. And it's also good to hear you've linked it to outcomes, to all these kind of things that are measurable. Since we asked about your greatest accomplishment, what's been your most difficult challenge up to this point?
I would say the most difficult challenge is getting buy-in and having folks buy in because they can see something for themselves in the work. So oftentimes, a large majority of folks see equity work as just focusing on the minority population or the least of these, whoever that may be. And the best equity approaches and strategies, diversity approaches, have something for everyone to buy into. And so getting folks to truly believe that and exhibit sort of that professional trust in the leadership team as well as the work is definitely the challenge, I would say.
Yeah, and I certainly could see how how that could be tough.
Yeah.
So we're coming to a close. Do you happen to have any final thoughts for our audience?
I would just say that now's an exciting time to be, despite our political climate, now's an exciting time to be a part of public education, especially in the state of PA. We have a lot of equity champions, if you will, and the work I can see is beginning to take off in a way that it has not exactly taken off historically, so it's exciting. Yeah. Yeah, ESSA, our federal policy, has a lot of equity weaved into that. Our Secretary of Education is very outspoken on equity. PSBA, our Pennsylvania State Boards Association, they just implemented an equity position and have subsequently put together one of the first equity consortiums a few months back. So the work is beginning to take on momentum and become very meaningful and robust.
That's good. I mean, I do have a bit of a bit of an afterthought, and maybe even a bit of a caution for the equity work for all of us, because I wonder about if you think about how multicultural education kind of got reframed, and when you talk to students now about multicultural education, it's all kind of festivals, ethnic foods, but that radical edge, that sort of the political edge, the teeth has almost been taken out of it. Paul Gorski writes about it. Several others have written about it. Some of us have cautioned in some early writings about the same thing that people are saying about social justice. We were talking about be careful along the way because it too could be reframed and depoliticized and everything. And now I wonder about equity. The higher it goes, the more people are talking about it. Will that highlight the work in terms of making it, a greater chance for it to actually come true, or the more that it leaves the grassroots and becomes part of mainstream, it becomes mainstream, and people make it more palatable, and they soften it over time. And I just kind of I just wonder about your thoughts.
I agree with you with regard to what happened to multiculturalism. I believe that we do have to be cautious of it, but I think that that's where our leadership programs, where we're building the pipeline, where that paradigm and those theories really need to stay married. And those theories I'm speaking about are social justice, leadership, organizational development. Like, we can't disjoint them, because then it leaves the opportunity for that to happen. And the other thing I would argue is that as if we keep pushing out teachers, educators that have this social justice training or theory embedded in their work, then we keep feeding the pipeline up. I think whenever we see those advanced programs, master's, doctoral degrees, that don't include the social justice piece, then we're definitely at risk for putting out a cadre, if you will, of folks that haven't been exposed and understand
Right.
how imperative it is to maintain that social justice piece. So
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah, well stated. Well stated.
Thank you.
All right, Sheena, other thoughts?
Just thank you for coming here today and
Sure.
sharing your knowledge, and it was extremely
Absolutely.
enlightening.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I could help.
Yes, we're so delighted to have you.
Thank you.
And we're also delighted for you to join us for this important conversation. Join us next time for our next episode, where we will be exploring another educational topic here on Education for the 21st Century. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.